You've written a book called Radical Nation,
Yes.
and you talk about the Biden administration and the fact that they are pushing us in a direction that a lot of the things that you talked about when you wrote that book had not come to pass when you wrote the book, but they seem to be coming to fruition now. Inflation, the border crisis that we're talking about, some of the K through 12 school indoctrinations, some of the things that were maybe just incubating or being hinted at the time have become major headline crises now. You were seeing around corners when you wrote that. Whichever side of the debate people want to come down on, you saw around corners about these things coming up. How do you feel about what you referred to, I guess, as a socialist agenda then being so dominant in the headlines now?
Yeah, it's interesting you brought that up. When I wrote Radical Nation, as you point out, like when you put the book to bed, you got a few months before it comes out. As you know, I mean, that's how publishing works. I wrote it saying, hey, this is the direction we're headed in. Here's where I think we're, based on this policy, this is pronouncement. And you're right. I mean, every time that when the book came out, I go, holy smokes, Radical Nation literally nailed it. I mean, this is what I thought was going to happen. And I, in a weird way, I hoped I was wrong. I mean, no one wants inflation. No one wants people to suffer. And yet all of these policies, I was telling people, I mean, Radical Nation was supposed to be a warning. Hey, if we don't get things back on track, this is where we're headed. They're going to try to pack the court. They're going to try to make DC a state. Boom, boom, boom. And lo and behold, in the last few weeks, here's what we got again. Let's pack the court. We need to make DC a state again. I mean, to your point, I mean, look, I have a perspective that I talk about very openly, but the point of Radical Nation is to lay out, here are the people, here are the policies they're pushing, and this is the direction we're going on. Maybe people say, great, I like that. But I am concerned about where we're headed in terms of education, where we're headed in terms of culture, obviously economically. I mean, there's a lot of problems in a lot of these policies. And I think that where this White House is, and I think part of the other thing that I lay out in Radical Nation is the motives. Like, I think that Joe Biden was pretty open and honest, honestly, during the election or during his candidacy, where him saying, these are the policies. I think you had a lot of people who said, no, he won't do that. He's just saying that to get elected. He's doing a lot of what he said he would do. And I think the problem was there are a lot of people who've known Biden for a long time. He's been in Washington 50 years and said, no, Biden's pragmatic, he's moderate, he won't do this. And I've been pushing this proposition that he wants a legacy that is the most progressive president, which is what he said he would do. And again, some Americans might say, great, I'm glad he's doing this. I would argue that that's not the Joe Biden that previously has been in Washington for 50 years in terms of the policies and ideology that he's pushing, but that's where we're headed.
Do you believe Trump is going to run again? And who do you think will run if he doesn't run?
So today, yes, I believe Donald Trump will run again. I think Donald Trump being Donald Trump will flirt 4 or 5 times before making it known exactly what his intentions are, because we talked about this, he understands the power of the media and the power of narratives. So he will keep us guessing. But I think that as of today, right now, everything that I've seen and heard is a man that wants to run again and win and get his policies back on track. If he doesn't run, I think Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is clearly the front runner in the Republican Party. But there are, Mike Pompeo, the former Secretary of State, Mike Pence, the former vice president, they will definitely run. I think Kristi Noem of South Dakota, the governor there, will probably run. Nikki Haley, the former governor of South Carolina. We are not going to suffer a lack of candidates, nor do I think they will on the Democratic side when Joe Biden doesn't run for re-election. And I think that's a fairly big given. On the Dem side, I will make this prediction. I believe that Pete Buttigieg will be the Democratic nominee the next time around. So
you think he will be?
I do. I think if the establishment Democratic Party believes he is the future, and I think that he is using this position as Secretary of Transportation to really cement some of the deficiencies that he had during his presidential run. I think politically he is a very, very strong candidate, and anyone on the right would be an idiot to dismiss him.
If Trump does run, is he electable?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you consider where we are right now, we've got the highest inflation in 40 years. The border's a mess. Foreign policy, we've got a mess in Ukraine. We've got North Korea threatening stuff. Iran is unstable. What's going on in China? I mean, I don't think. I mean, look at what's happening in the midterms right now. People are 18 months into Joe Biden saying, "Hey, I'd like a redo." So, if Trump's the nominee, most elections where you have an incumbent, if Biden were the incumbent, were to seek re-election, hands down, if he wins. If Biden doesn't, which I said I'm fairly certain that he won't, it'll depend on who the nominee is. If it is Buttigieg, I think Buttigieg would give him a run for his money. But I think ultimately, based on the last 4 years, Trump gets reelected.
Do you think the Republican Party wants him to run again, or do you think they're looking for a new direction, a new generation of leadership?
I think most of the party wants him. There are obviously some vocal minority aspects of the party that doesn't. But when you, by and large, look at who people want to run in polls, they'll say Donald Trump. You look at his influence in the Republican primaries right now, Trump-supported candidates do very well for a reason. And you look at the interest that still exists in what he does online, his platforms. I mean, he commands a political presence unlike either party has seen, at least in the modern age, and I would venture to say probably going back through history.
Do you think that either party is going to listen to Americans enough to put individual liberty and freedom to the forefront? Again, the reason I ask that question is because I think if you've got a new shovel, everybody wants to dig a hole. And I think when we got into the pandemic and the government got really involved in people's lives and dictating, do this, do that, do the other, it's sometimes hard to give up what you've gotten. You've gotten new control. You've gotten new inroads into people's lives. And I'm just wondering if you think either party will recognize that that's going to be important to Americans.
Well, I think the Republicans, I mean, I think generally speaking, when you look at what states did well and where people are migrating, I think the Republican governors and folks on the right definitely, I think, believe much more in individual liberty right now, recognize what the lockdowns did, what the mandates did. And frankly, I think even some of the stuff that we're seeing in schools, when parents watched their kids at home on Zooms and recognized what was going on in classrooms around the country, they got much more involved and said, I want to run for school board. I want to be more involved in my child's curriculum or what's happening in their classroom. So I think in many ways, I firmly believe that the Republican Party has tried to harness that. I think many folks on the left like the idea of government being more involved. And that's frankly the philosophical and ideological difference between the two parties.
You know, from a psychological standpoint, I have the feeling that you really make a mistake if you take any position that rewards bad behavior. And it seems to me that we've done a lot of things in the last 2 or 3 years that has rewarded bad behavior. I'm talking about everything from paying people not to work to not prosecuting crimes to a lot of things that, just in my opinion, that if we're not consequating behavior, if we're actually rewarding things we don't want to reoccur, we're getting way off just common sense.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, the idea that you can bash a building or vandalize a building or smash the window of a police car and there's no consequence for it. I just remember growing up, there was a sense of right and wrong, of obeying the law. And now when somebody breaks the law, or even now we're seeing people go to the Supreme Court justices' homes and threaten them. I don't understand how that is acceptable behavior. And to your point, the second that you mainstream that and say, oh, that's fine because we have a problem. When you can harm someone or threaten someone or destroy property without consequence or impunity, that's a very dangerous place as a society to be in, as a country. I mean, we're only as strong as the laws that we pass. I mean, I'm watching lawmakers talk about not enforcing certain laws. And I'm like, that's not how the country works. If you don't like the law, there's a process for getting it changed or removed or repealed, but you don't get to go around and pick and choose what you want to obey in this country. And I think we're losing that sense of right and wrong in terms of lawlessness, but also just a sense of decency. And again, there's plenty to go around on both sides. And but I think this idea of how we treat each other is not something that that is a good is where I think is healthy for the society right now.
Well, I agree with you, and I think there are a lot of differences we have. I don't think it's just all get around the campfire and sing Kumbaya, because there are major issues about which people have serious differences, and those need to be dealt with. It's not just everybody just come together. There are differences, but there are ways to deal with those.
You know, we talked about this at the beginning. One of the things that there is a prevailing sense that kind of behavior gets all the attention. And this is, this clip went viral. If you start to look at, I mentioned how Spicer and Company is every night on Newsmax. We're the second highest rated show on the network. If people didn't want to see a civil and respectful discussion of issues and policies, they could tune us out. They come back every night. And I think if you look at podcasts like yours and a lot of shows that don't have that animosity, that sort of angry nature to them, they do well. So I think that there's this narrative sometimes that only conflict sells or that it's rewarded. And I think that isn't entirely true, that there are outlets, there are shows, there are platforms that people are going to because they want a civil, respectful discussion or discussion of ideas. So I think we also have to start making sure that we help point people into where I think most Americans are, not just the loud minorities on the ends of the spectrum.